You're the last one standing.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'd like to call the Door County Board of Supervisors meeting to order on Tuesday, August 27th at 9 a.m. Would you please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
We're working today. I'm not working at all.
Stickler for, we have 20 present and 1 vacant. Presentation of the agenda.
Move to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Correspondence. You have your unassigned fund balance, the resolution from the town of Nassau concerning EMS services, the letter from U.S. Senator Tammy Baldwin, and the petition signed with emergency services. Any additional correspondence anybody wants to add or bring up? Public comment. Does anybody in the audience care to make a public comment this morning? Good morning.
Yeah, I will. My name is Linda Merline. I live at 3588 Peninsula Players Road, Fish Creek, Wisconsin. And I would like to speak about the tax amendments for the campgrounds.
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you. We cannot allow any comment or additional testimony on that because the public hearing was held on that particular matter.
Can't make a comment on it?
No, sorry. Anybody else?
Don Fricks, 8305 Cornerline Road, Fish Creek. I first have to thank 2 board members who I don't know who they are, who I was in an email from Representative Kitchen's staff said, well, that 2 board members after the administrative committee last week informed the representative's office that I had misrepresented his stance on redistricting. So I want to thank you because I got a personal email from Joel Kitchens, and that's the first time I've got a response from him in 2 to 3 years on anything. So I really appreciate that, and if those 2 anonymous board members would like to talk to me, I can refer them to a statewide blog that was published on August 8th, and audio recordings of what Representative Kitchen said to the Door County Republican meetings on August 6th about redistricting. So thank you again, whoever you are. I would like to ask the board again, because I don't think it's going to get recorded as what I said at the administrative committee meeting. I'm asking the board to make available all audio recordings of all committee meetings online on the county website. And I'd like to ask the board also to reinstate putting the statements of what people say at committee meetings instead of just putting the name so-and-so spoke. I believe the policy was changed recently, and obviously the county doesn't have to do that, but I think for communicating to among board members who can't make all the committee meetings, they'll know a little bit of what the public might be bringing to the county board. So those are my main 2 points, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, if not, we'll move to the next. Supervisor's response. Approval of the minutes of July 23rd, 2019 regular meeting.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Any additions, deletions, comments, grammatical remarks, other errors? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Pending business and updates. Resolutions. 2019-52, a memorandum, Keith Breidenhagen. Typically, we have an individual that is currently serving in that district seat read the memorandum. or a memoriam. That is currently the seat that I am in, District 20, so I will be reading Keith's memoriam this morning. First of all, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the resolution.
I'll second that, Mr. Chairman.
In memoriam of Keith Breidenhagen, to the Door County Board of Supervisors. Whereas Keith Breidenhagen passed away on July 23, 2019, and whereas Supervisor Breidenhagen was first elected to the Door County Board of Supervisors and served from February 14th through April 5th, 2002. He was then re-elected in April 2002 and served through April 2004. And whereas Supervisor Breidenhagen represented District 19 and then after redistricting District 20, consisting of the town of Liberty Grove, Ward 2, and the village of Sister Bay. And whereas Supervisor Breidenhagen served on several committees, including Highway, Law Enforcement, Library Board, Resource Planning, Ethics, and Highway Safety Commission. And whereas, in addition, Keith Breidenhagen served as chairperson of Emergency Services Communications Committee and Local Emergency Planning Committee. Now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Supervisors, and assembled in regular session this 27th day of August 2019, extend our sincere sympathy to the family of Keith Breidenhagen with this acknowledgement of his dedication to the citizens of Door County. All in favor?
Aye.
Next was Resolution 2019-53, recognizing Supervisor Kathy Schultz and services to the County Board. Since that position is currently vacant, we're waiting for additional volunteers. I will read her recognition. First of all, I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
Recognizing Supervisor Kathy Schultz and service to the County Board. To the County Board of Supervisors, whereas Kathy Schultz was first appointed to the Door County Board of Supervisors in September 2009. She was duly elected to subsequent terms and served through August 12, 2019, for a total of 10 years on the board. And whereas Supervisor Schultz represented Supervisory District 13, encompassing the city of Sturgeon Bay, Wards 13 and 14, and whereas during her tenure, Supervisor Schultz served on many committees and boards, including Administrative, Airport and Parks, Board of Health, Community Programs, Economic Development, Finance, Information Systems, Technology Services, Law Enforcement, Legislative, Library, Negotiating, and Public Safety. And whereas Supervisor Schultz also served at various times as Chairperson of Board of Health, Legislative, and Finance Committee. And whereas Kathy Schultz also served as Deputy Clerk for the City of Sturgeon Bay, later becoming the City Clerk Treasurer. Now therefore be it resolved that the County Board of Supervisors, assembled this 27th day of August 2019, extends to Kathy Schultz our sincere thanks and appreciation of her service to the people of Door County, and wish her the best in her future endeavors. All in favor?
Aye.
Resolution 2019-54, appoint Door County Veteran Service Officer. I will turn that over to Ken.
Do we get a motion?
Oh, I'm sorry, I need a motion.
Motion to approve.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you.
So yes, I'd like to maybe have Beth come up and maybe just give a little background for herself. But again, as part of the process, we went through a search, and I was very excited with being able to select Beth and recommend her as our upcoming CSO. So Beth, maybe you just want to say a thing about yourself?
Good morning, County Board members. My name is Beth Wartella. I'm originally from the Door County area, and I've been working up in the Veteran Service Office as the assistant for roughly 5 years. I served in the United States Navy from 2008 to 2011. I was a Master at Arms, which is the equivalent of military police. So I was trained in law enforcement, anti-terrorism tactics, and a whole slew of things. So I look forward to continuing to work with the veterans in the county. And if you have anyone that you know that has not received services from our office, please send them my way. And I look forward to working with you all in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All in favor?
Aye.
Resolution 2019-55, approval of gift, grant, and/or donation to the School Resource Officer Unit. Joel?
I'd like to make a motion to approve Resolution 2019-55.
Second.
Is the sheriff in? No? Yes, it's just to accept donated funds from organizations in the county for the school resource officer position.
Okay. Any questions? Now we'll go to the voter board. That is passed on a vote of 20 yes, 1 vacant. Resolution 2019-56, transfer of non-budgeted funds for cost of abatement of removal of human health hazard. David?
I'd like to make a I'd like to recommend approval of Resolution 2019-56, dealing with a human health hazard at a property. It's gone to court. It was declared a health hazard by the sanitarian and the public health department, and there weren't funds for the project.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Any further explanation, Grant?
If wanted, very briefly, my office initiated an action to abate a human health hazard back in July of this year. The cost of abating the human health hazard has been estimated to be up to $40,000. Believe it or not, the alternatives to us not abating the human health hazard would likely be greater over time. Those of you that have been on the board for a period of time may remember that we went through this same process with the same property back in 2002 and managed to maintain it in some semblance of livability for the better part of 17 years. So I don't know if anybody has any questions.
Susan?
I do. I've gotten questions on this one, and I just wonder if you could share the process that happens. How it gets recommended so that it gets evaluated for a human hazard. And I mean, what people are saying to me is, well, why this one and not some of these other ones? So if there's any way you can talk about that in a kind of a general way, what are the criterion? Why do some not get dealt with? I would appreciate that.
One, we're generally a complaint-driven system. When we get complaints, the public health nurse and/or our sanitarian will go out and inspect a private parcel and determine whether or not it rises to the level of a human health hazard. I can say without fear of contradiction that the human health hazard that is present on this particular residence has no match in Door County. Most people, when they refer to a human health hazard, are actually probably talking about a nuisance. That would be the old cars in the yard, maybe some garbage cans strewn in the yard, a house that's in a state of disrepair, perhaps dilapidated, but still able to be lived in. So I think there's some misunderstanding as to what actually a human health hazard is, and it really explains itself. It is a condition, in this case within a residence, that poses a risk to human health. So,
Thank you.
John?
Has there, I don't know what the cost was last time, what it cost the county to do the abatement, I guess, last time. Is there any way we can know that, or is that?
$7,000, and we have a lien against the property in that amount.
And how do we come up with the possible 40,000 this time?
Through a transfer of non-budgeted funds as outlined in the resolution, and how we would hope to recoup it is, again, a lien against the property. We've been completely open and honest about the fact that the value of the property is probably less than what we will expend this time around to clean up the human health hazard.
How did we guess it was going to be 40,000?
Oh, through some estimates that we received from companies that clean this up. The world has changed quite a bit since 2002. Back in 2002, quite frankly, there were volunteers, and people that just went in and did a lot of the work themselves. We are now existing in a period of time when perhaps lawyers have taken over the world, there's regulations, and people that are certified to address human health hazards have to come in and do the cleanup. And we're talking about people in hazmat suits and with HEPA vacs and things of that nature, and properly disposing of the items in the residence that need to be disposed of. So it is expensive. It's far more expensive than it was in 2002. At least part of the reason is we have to hire a contractor or contractors that are certified to do this type of cleanup.
Linda?
Is this property occupied, and is there going to be a likelihood that we need to come back and clean it up again in 10 years? Yeah.
Yes. I don't know in 10 years, but there is a likelihood that this will repeat itself. And I will stress, this is still the least costly, at least in our estimation, option that is available to the county, long-term.
And just to add to the part of the discussion at Human Services going on at Finance is that even after the cleanup, will the home be livable? And the discussion was you can't even tell at this point right now. So that's why the $40,000 would be up to. So at any point, hopefully if what the discussion is and having these monies come forward is that if there would be some sort of damage that the home cannot be livable in as they discover as they're cleaning, then that should stop, and then we'll have to reevaluate at that point.
We're as certain as we can be that the house will be habitable after the cleanup, and also, I don't want to give you any false hope it's going to be significantly less, but $40,000 is our version of a worst-case scenario. It could be considerably less. I can't imagine it would be greater than that.
David?
Are there steps the county can take at this stage or in the near future that would mitigate this coming up again, like assistance of some sort, visits or something, to mitigate it becoming another issue again in 17 years, you know, at least to reduce the level of cleanup necessary?
We can, as we have in the past, voluntarily offer assistance. But once the court case is closed, our ability to impose assistance upon the individual who occupies the house is fairly limited. We can offer it, and if it's accepted, great. If not, then it's reasonable to assume that the condition of the house will degrade again over time.
Anybody else? Linda?
Could there be an alternative to seek an order to raise or demolish the building in its entirety?
That is really the only alternative, would be to seek an order to raise and demolish the building. That might be cheaper in the short term. It might not. I think it would probably end up being about the same based on quotes we've gotten for raising and demolishing houses that the county has owned. But then the individual who resides in the house would be left without a place to live.
Can I ask
Sure.
one more question? What was Human Services, did this come before the Human Services Department, and what was their recommendation?
The Health and Human Services Department, particularly well, they're one now. The Health and Human Services Department has been involved with this since the start, and I think Joe's in the back, but my understanding is that they are in agreement with the recommendation that's coming forward from staff, is that the county go ahead and abate the human health hazard. It's quite frankly the lesser of two evils, perhaps not to make a correct analogy, but it's, again, I think the least expensive option in the long run. We have to go into it with our eyes wide open. Will this problem persist? Yes. Will the condition of the house over time, might take 10 years, might take 15 years, maybe we'll eke out 17 years again, but this will repeat itself in all likelihood.
John, did you have another question?
Yeah, my question, I don't know if it can be answered. Is there any chance of guardianship of this individual, so we do have access to that home on a regular basis for, I guess, cleaning it up or keeping it in livable conditions?
At present, though, the person is competent.
Okay.
Anybody else? If not, we'll go to the voter board. Oh, okay. We need a 2/3 vote on this because this is extraordinary. That is passed on a vote of 19 yes, 1 no, and 1 vacant. Resolution 2019-57, approval of 2019-2021 collective bargaining agreement, Door County Emergency Services, IAFF, Local 4982. Ken, do you want to?
Actually, Grant will do a quick summary for us.
Okay, do you want to, would somebody,
Want to make a motion?
somebody want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve Resolution 2019-57.
Second.
Well, you have to listen to me 2 times in a row, wow. Current collective bargaining agreement expired on December 31st, 2018. Following a significant period of negotiations, we have reached a 3-year agreement. That agreement will run 2019 through 2021. I'm going to go through the agreement very quickly. It was included in the packet. I should note that there may be some tweaking of the agreement because we have attorneys involved, but the substance of the agreement will be as it appears today. First, I will direct your attention to page 28, Article 7, vacations. What has changed is that the employers hired prior to January 1, 2019 will continue to accrue vacation at the current rate. Those employees hired after June 1, 2019 will accrue vacation at a lesser rate as set forth in Article 7. Page 29, Article 8, holidays. We have added Easter as a holiday. Easter has always been a holiday. It was just addressed separately, and we, because of the change in the compensation plan, we just lumped it in with the other holidays. Also, we have changed how employees, excuse me, are paid when they work on a holiday. That is related to the change in compensation plan that I'll discuss near the end. Page 31. Excuse me, page 29, Article 8, no, I was right, page 31, Article 9, sick leave. There's been a change in the payout for employees hired prior to January 1, 2019. They will be paid out at the rate of 55%, and those employees hired on or after January 1, 2019 will be paid out at the rate of 50%. And what you'll notice is a pattern, and this is common when we negotiate, is that the existing employees are grandfathered, and when we make a change, that applies to the new employees coming in the door. And that's, in terms of fairness, meets the employees' expectations. The people coming in the door know what the rules of the game are when they get hired, and those that have been here long-term enjoy the benefits of what they had previously. Page 32, Article 11, leave of absence. The language has changed to reflect the current practices. Page 34, Article 15, workers' compensation. Again, the language was changed to reflect the current practices and the Wisconsin Workers' Compensation Act. Article 16, call-in, overtime, and training time. The language has changed because of the changes to the wage schedule that we will discuss later. Page 35, Article 17, work day and work week. The language has been changed to reflect the fact that the central station is up and operational. So we've just deleted the language that applied before that took place. Article 18, Wisconsin Retirement System. The language has changed to reflect the statutes. The employees pay the employee share, the employer pay the employer share. So it should be pretty simple and straightforward going forward. Page 36, Article 19, health insurance. The language has changed to reflect the statutes. For 2019, 2020, the status quo will persist. In 2021, this bargaining unit will move to the Go 365 program, which the non-represented employees are participating in, and also the sheriff's deputies are participating in. So by 2021, we'll all be under the same umbrella for the Go 365. Page 38, Article 22, agency fee or other payment to the union. This language change was necessitated by a 2018 U.S. Supreme Court decision, the Janus versus AFSCME case. The language in the collective bargaining agreement is necessary to come into compliance with that court decision. Page 41, Article 25, longevity. It will continue as to the employees hired before January 1, 2019. There will be no longevity pay to those employees hired on or after January 1, 2019. Page 42, Article 28, wages. The wage schedule, and you should actually look at page 45, Appendix A. The old wage schedule had 6 steps and pay rates A through pay rates D. The new wage schedule did away with the rate A through D and has 7 steps. Step 1 or the start step through step 7. And that represents a fairly significant change in the way that this bargaining unit has been compensated for those of you who have been around for a little bit of time. And I think represents a significant leap forward in terms of simplicity and getting this bargaining unit in line with the way everybody else is compensated. In terms of across-the-board wage increases, bear with me while I get to the page. For 2019, each employee will receive a minimum of a 2% increase in the form of a base wage increase through aging and/or steps, or supplemented with a bonus. That should be familiar with you because that is how we handle the non-represented employees now with our compensation plan. For instance, if you're at the top of the wage scale, you don't get an increase in your base wage. What you do is you get a bonus which doesn't increase your base wage but just represents a bonus for that particular year. In 2020, the wage schedule will be aged by 0.5%. And again, each employee will be provided a minimum 2% increase, and that increase will take the form of a base increase or a bonus. And the same thing with 2021. The wage schedule will be aged by 0.5%, and there will be a minimum 2% increase in the form of a base wage increase or a bonus. And I should note that the bonus is calculated off the W-2 earnings on the last full pay period in the given year. So the only other thing of note, and I don't even know if it's all that important, but Article 31, which is on page 43, a joint management and union task force has been incorporated into the collective bargaining agreement. For many years, that's been a sidebar letter of agreement, but what we hope and is the case, and I think what has occurred in the past, is that when there are issues to discuss, this joint management task force gets together and discuss them during these interim periods when the collective bargaining agreement is in place, and not wait until we get to bargaining to hash things out. So we can address issues, if we choose to, as they come up. I don't know if anybody has any questions? Yes, Vinnie?
Can you just explain the longevity pay? You spoke about it on page 41, Article 25.
Okay.
Thank you. Just an explanation of longevity.
What longevity pay is? Longevity pay is just pay that somebody gets for years in the saddle. So for instance, if you're here for 1 year, you get X number of dollars. And if you're here for 2 years, let's say the longevity pay for purposes of the example is $200 a year. If you were here for 25 years, that's a fairly significant payment, 100 times 25. And what we've done across the board with the non-represented folks and also the folks that are now represented, is trying to get rid of the longevity pay. That's sort of a remnant of days gone by when unions first came in, and is akin to the seniority principle. Is the longer you're here, the more pay you should get, the more benefits you should get. So that's all it is. And what we try to do is just, again, draw a line in the sand and say the employees that are hired from the point in time when this collective bargaining agreement is in effect forward aren't entitled to longevity pay. Those employees that enjoy it currently will continue to enjoy it until they retire or otherwise separate themselves from employment with the county.
So the way it would look for them would be the 7-step system with a 2% bonus if they were at step 7, instead of a longevity.
No, they still, that's not an instead of. Longevity is completely separate. They just no longer will get longevity pay.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Yes.
Page 43, Article 31, formation of a joint management and union task force. Normally, I'm used to seeing how that can be made up of, what members are going to be part of it. What was the intent?
The bargaining unit would get to choose who they want to serve on the joint labor management task force, and from the labor side, the bargaining team, so it would be the negotiating committee, and whatever members from the negotiating committee that would want to participate, myself, Ken, Kelly, and Aaron, probably from the management side. If we were talking about, for instance, health insurance, we might call in one of our outside experts or something along those lines. But we wanted to keep it open to make sure that we had the correct people at the table, depending on what issue we were discussing. Yes.
Okay.
No other questions? Thanks.
Oh, just one. Has the bargaining unit had a chance to go over this? And I understand they don't make a final yes, we're taking it or anything, but
No, they're at the same phase we are, and that's why I said at the beginning, we may be tweaking, as you know, when attorneys get together and have to agree on a document, undoubtedly there'll be some tweaks. If there's any substantive changes, we'll bring it back, but we believe it's in substantially final form. And you've been through this process, John.
I have. I'm just trying to clarify it for my own thought process here, but they looked at this same document that we're looking at today.
Correct,
Okay.
and I think they are in the process of ratifying it as we speak, but
Okay,
I've not heard back, so.
Thank you.
Bob?
And I just have a generic, more of a generic question, just trying to follow along. I did look up some minutes, but didn't see the information I was looking for. I mean, we had put out an RFQ, and we've gotten a lot of feedback from communities and people saying, hey, we don't want to privatize EMS. I mean, is this like putting that behind us now that we're getting to the point where or, I mean, I don't know if I'm clear with my, I mean, is this, we're getting to a point where like that's not, we're not talking about RFQ or going privatizing anymore? Or is that still something being worked on, or?
I think from the county's bargaining team, we saw those as two distinct and separate things. We achieved the collective bargaining agreement, and that'll be in effect for 3 years, and nothing that we do on the RFQ side will in any way, shape, or form impact that. From the RFQ side, I think we were just casting our net to see what was out there, what kind of proposals would come forward, do our due diligence, and see what comes of it. So.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate the clarification. Thank you.
Anybody else? David?
Actually, another question relative to wages. Since this goes back to January 1st, 2019, obviously there'll be some back pay or something to that effect, depending upon who's affected how.
Yeah. Yeah, we are going to, and I wish I could explain it to you, but I can't. Maybe Ken can step in, but I know that Kelly, I don't necessarily see her back there, had been talking with some of the bargaining unit members, and we're going to take the famous KISS approach because it would simply be too difficult to go back. Aaron, is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, and keep track of everybody's hours because of the fact that we weren't able to reach a settlement before the prior agreement expired. So we have a path to get there, and we'll have to rely on Kelly and probably our finance department and Aaron to work out the numbers.
And not, just again, I work numbers. The other side of that is, are there any individuals that in theory would get paid less because of the scheduling and the pricing, the scheduling that was worked out on this?
No, because we can't unring the bell. There's something called the dynamic status quo, which continues, although the prior collective bargaining agreement expired on December 31st, 2018. The dynamic status quo, which is actually that collective bargaining agreement, continues until we actually have an agreement that's been ratified by the bargaining unit, approved by the county, and executed. So whatever happened in terms of their scheduling and their pay prior to this, we're not going to, we can't go back and undo. So.
Thank you. Anybody else? Ken?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I went over this, and there are issues I have with the contract. I'm not going to vote for it, but I want to explain, when you see that I voted against it, I'm not voting against the EMS service. I'm all for the service. They have my support. There are just issues in the contract I find that just don't let me vote for it, okay? So I don't want the vote misconstrued. I wanted to explain that ahead of time.
Anybody else? If not, we'll go to the voter board. That is passed on a vote of 19 yes, 1 no, and 1 vacant. Thank you. Resolution 2019-58, supervisor compensation and reimbursement. Do I have a motion? Nobody's going to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to accept resolution number 58, supervisor compensation and reimbursement.
I'll second it.
Okay.
Sure, I can just do, and maybe Grant can back me up, but again, if you recall at the last meeting, we had the, I guess, the compensation, and that part was, in essence, did not carry through at the majority vote. But then after that, the county board chairman had mentioned that we'd bring back or have a discussion in regards to the compensation portion, and that was brought forward to the administrative committee, and they had recommended that it come forward to county board. In essence, what we're looking at is on page 51 of your packet. In essence, we'd be amending our rules when it comes back up in November, correct, Grant? Is the right timing for our annual meeting?
Yes.
And in your rules, this is what you would actually see it worded in your packet itself. In essence, what's being proposed is that each supervisor be allocated up to $1,500, and again, it'd be applied for authorized expenses regarding meals, lodging, and registration. It does not include the mileage, and it does not include, I guess, what you consider the per diem. People call it per diem, I call it the wage during the day. So your wage is kept separate from that. So this just restricts or has limitations in terms of your authorized expenses against for meals, lodging, and registration that are incurred for it. And again, it's capped at $1,500, and the way it would be done is that we just track expenses related to supervisors' travel, and we just track for it that way. So I don't know if there's any specific questions. I know we discussed it pretty in-depth last month, but I can answer questions if you'd like.
John?
Does this involve any kind of cost savings to the county as far as tax dollars by doing this, or is this just strictly cost-effective way of doing the business of what we're spending?
I guess there's two ways of answering that. If you just do just straight out, we're going to spend $1,500 per supervisor, you could say, well, it's actually costing us more. But that's assuming everyone went out and spent all $1,500 of their allocation. I can tell you the cost of this off that is about $31,000, but we usually average between $16,000 to $18,000 of actual expenses. I would assume that we'd experience the same level of expenditures, just because I don't see people just traveling, just to travel, I guess a way of saying it. I think the only thing that it would do is make it a little bit more as far as a level playing field that's for everyone just monitoring what their expenses and travels are. But I guess that'd be the biggest difference. So I just want to caveat, if everyone would spend all of it, yes, it'd actually cost us more, but I'm not expecting that.
Right, but overall, this isn't saving, this isn't done because we're way over the expense of the 31,000, I guess, is what you
Correct.
came up with?
Correct.
This is more geared towards certain individuals having more travel time or schooling time, I guess, if you want to say, and we just want to make sure we're not going over that limit?
Correct. I think what it does is this levels the playing field, that everyone, as far as that would potentially run, knows what the allocation is towards travel or training related to that. And there is a provision in there that, you know, if someone hits that cap, but there is something that's truly important that they need to go, they can come back and get permission from the county board to attend those other features. But again, right now, it just kind of sets a level playing field for all the supervisors as far as what they have per year to attend.
Thank you.
Ken?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to cause Supervisors Kohout or Robillard to have a heart attack, but I find this $1,500 overly generous. I would like.
Still my heart.
I am going to have a heart attack.
I thought about this, and it just seems maybe $1,200 would be a fair rate. And I would make an amendment that we change that $1,500 annually to $1,200 annually.
Before you do that, can we have an explanation of where the 1,500 came from? Why we rented that?
Sure, let me just give an explanation. So what we did is, we looked at WCA. So WCA has 2 conferences a year, one in the spring and one in the fall. And again, our registration usually is about $175. The lodging, even though they consider government rates, are quite high, even if we average that down a little bit. And we also include at least one meal. So we average about $500 for WCA. So if we did 2 conferences, that's about $1,000. What we did throw in is one other conference. And again, whether, just pick a committee, whether it's a legislative day thing down in Madison, or you did LCC or highway or another. That way we included one other conference at 2 days. And that averages, again, just working out some numbers with Jill, around $425. So that's, in essence, 3 trips that a supervisor could attend. And then usually there's either like a local meeting, like a WCA has a regional meeting, or let's say, there's something down in Kewaunee County as far as a joint meeting or something like that, or UW Extension, that type of thing. And there could be a small registration or a meal related to that. But if you add those all up, you end up with around $1,475, so we just rounded up to $1,500. I'm fine with taking it down, but again, we just tried to allocate the 2 WCA conferences plus one other conference for a supervisor to attend.
Wait, did you want to?
I'll still stand by my motion to reduce it to
Okay.
1,200.
Is there a second to Ken's motion to reduce to 1,200?
I'll second that motion.
Okay. Any other discussion on the amendment? Okay, so we'll go to the voter board. I'm sorry.
No, on the amendment, it's just a simple majority.
Mr. Chairman, would it be possible to have the verbiage read back to us before we take the vote?
Sure.
This is just the amendment.
Just to make sure. She's typing a lot.
I was not typing, I was trying to get it up on the
Ah, okay.
phone. It's to change the annual cap to $1,200.
So in essence, on page 51 of the packet, if you look under section 5, item A, where it says each supervisor will be allocated $1,500, that would be amended to read $1,200 annually. That's on page 51, item 5, item A, sub A.
Okay. We'll go to voter board. That has passed and voted 12 yes, 8 no, and 1 vacant. Okay, so it's been amended to 1,200. Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just trying to understand, so is the change that we're talking about here is just putting a cap? Is there anything else that's changing other than just putting a dollar amount total? Nothing else is changing?
Okay. So I'm going to answer your question with maybe partially a question or a partial answer. So what, I mean, what's really changing is this, everything related to anything related to your travel per diem. So your wage as far as your meetings, your mileage as far as your regular committee meetings, all that remains consistent.
Right.
What this really touches would be anything related to conferences or specific training. So anything that you'd sign up for, get authorization to go to. When that would get submitted, we'd actually track those expenses. And then once you start to reach that cap, we'll inform you of that. So that way you know that you're hitting close to that cap. So that would be the change that you'd experience as a supervisor in terms of how you move forward.
Right.
This
So-
items are related to conferences and training, that type of.
So there's
It's not related to committees that
Understand,
you're on or travel
understand.
required for committee and
Right.
that sort of thing.
It's a monetary cap on those, I guess, extra things or outside of regular daily county or monthly county business. So I guess my question then is, so are we not putting a larger burden on the clerk and maybe taking more of her time and having a larger expense for her having to now have to keep track of everything, especially now that it's reduced, if we're saying that around $1,500 is sort of the average and that's what people are normally doing, and now we just agreed to say, okay, now it's even less than that. Now she's got isn't that accurate that she even has more work now to do to try to, keep track of everybody, and are we not, I'm not sure if we're, penny wise, pound foolish, I'm not sure. Just an open-ended question, I guess, but.
From the administrative side, it won't, I mean, we actually go through a lot of the expenses now, and it's been one of those things that we've, I guess, improved in terms of our tracking. But in terms of actually being able to track it, it won't be difficult because everything comes through on your vouchers anyways, in terms of reimbursements and those costs related to it. So from an administrative standpoint, yes, we'll have a new spreadsheet that will track your expenses, but it won't be overly burdensome in that standpoint.
Okay, well, that's good to know.
Thank you.
I would ask that we get a list of what our regular costs are, I mean, even if it's just for the previous year, for things that we have attended, just so we can keep an eye on that. I can think about the scenario of Bob and Vinny and I going down to Madison for part of the WCA ambassador team. I could see that bringing us up to or around that cap with expenses, and really where it would end up applying would be running out of funds, if you will, for the September WCA meeting. So I think that an approval from the county board for additional travel, if you will, I love that idea, that we would all be aware of what other things, extraneous things that other supervisors are doing. But that approval was strange to me because I feel like the approval should come more for like the WCA ambassador program rather than whether or not we're going to the conference in September. You know what does that make sense?
Yep.
So, yeah, I'm not exactly really, I don't feel like it's necessarily a really clear system currently, the way we have it presented here. Yes?
Hi.
Hi.
Hello. Helen?
I think that's $25 to your charity of choice, please. I think it's 50.
United Way.
The other, or I
United
forget
Way.
what it was. But the other question I have is, we then need a good procedure, easy to follow procedure. Because right now, I would not know who to go to necessarily to find out how to get on the county board. What's the procedure if you're going over your $1,200?
David?
Right now, presumably somebody's been tracking to some level, and that was difficult for me to find information on, but we're right now on the 21 that are here. Purely as a percentage, what percentage in 2018 would have exceeded the 1,500?
Yeah.
I would need to look that up.
So we don't have a concept.
How many people?
Nope, Well, yeah, I mean, that's the same thing.
I'll do the math myself.
The idea behind this was, if you would recall, was to take what was being spent on registrations, hotels, et cetera, and to level the playing field where everybody got equal access to those funds so they could pick and choose what they wanted to attend or not attend. It was as simple as that. So they took an average of what was being spent, divided it by the 21, and said, here's your average of 1,500. So that's where this discussion.
I understand that, because the second half of that question is, of the people that are not in that percentage, what is the average dollar value being spent by them?
Yeah, don't know, we haven't done that. Wasn't part of what we were asked to look at.
Well, I kind of inquired about it, and it was difficult to find.
Did you find it?
And ultimately, part of my question is, because of the nature of my business, I have difficulty in dealing with creating rules for a relatively minority value of the groups causing an issue, a concern. This could be viewed by new incoming individuals that the other side of this coin is, this could be viewed as incoming individuals as being, hey, I can spend up to $1,500, where I didn't have a clue. I mean, I honestly would have liked to know for the whole time I've been here how much money is being spent towards the things I've been going to. Some of the numbers I saw recently kind of surprised me with even my mileage monies that go to it.
Right, mileage doesn't apply.
I know, but that's part of the numbers that came to me were mileage. The other part of that is, outside of the county board conventions, specifically county board activities, one of the dilemmas that I see coming up on a routine basis that was given as an example of why we need to look at this is departments have to budget their own funds for their own training. And there are times when they have to, due to their budget constraints, choose to send somebody, if it's 50% of their employees to valued training that's on the other side of the state because of the cost of the travel, the room and board, so forth. If the dilemma arises from board members, which I have no issues with, and the educated board, arrives in part from board members going to conventions on a routine basis when their own department cannot afford to send on a routine basis, why not a percentage of that training budget to help drive that value of percentage of supervisors that sit in the oversight committee going to things? But Ken, did you have a chance to find the kind of direction I was looking for?
After I'm relogging into the network. I'm trying to get my file. We did analysis on 2018, so I know what the costs were for 2018, but I got to get back into the network.
Our IT company is not, our IT department isn't working well for you?
Not at the moment. It's not our IT department, it's my Surface that's not
But
working.
it's still something they oversee.
While he's looking that up, Susan.
Good paperweight.
In my mind, the purpose of this is kind of philosophical. In times when we have to limit money, you look at all the ways to do that. And I'm part of the reason that this, I don't know, I've done some going to conferences and things, like I started going to the ambassador program and some of these other things and took advantage of opportunities, which I think WCA has increased. So the problem is, where do you draw the line? And we haven't drawn a line in the past, and that essentially is the problem. Our budgets for our departments draw a line for our department heads in terms of managing their training for their employees. And I hope I'm not speaking incorrectly when I say we haven't drawn that same line for us. And I think we need to be fair. When I was a teacher, years and years ago, in the days when the cost cutting started, we were all given a certain budget also and said, if you want to go beyond that, you pay it out of your own money, but this is what you are provided to use. And I think that's reasonable. We have to pick and choose what we go to, that it's not, to quote my Supervisor Ninus behind me, it's not a blank check. And so I just think it's reasonable to set a limit and say, pick what's most valuable to you. and the committees that you're on. To suggest that it should come out of a department budget, I think is unfair, because what department head is going to say to their county board supervisors, we don't want you to go? I just think that's an unfair expectation to put on them.
You miss, if that was in reference to a comment I made, that was not my intent.
No.
My
It
intent
was
to
in a
drive that
discussion we've
value.
had at committee levels that we've
My
talked
intent
about
was to
that.
drive the final value
Yeah,
based
no.
on what they could afford for their own employees.
No, that isn't where it came from. I mean, we've talked about this piece before. I just think we need to police ourselves on this.
I agree with that.
Ms.?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in no way does the miles traveled to conferences, training, meetings, or anything included in this $1,200? That's just a separate, you get the mileage to whatever you do.
Continue to claim the mileage as you have in the past.
Yeah.
And on that topic, departments are required to use county vehicles. Quite honestly, that's the same thing for this board. This board should be required to use county vehicles whenever possible. And it doesn't always happen.
They've always been made available. Megan?
Thank you. I agree with what Supervisor Kohout had to say. I am also curious, I kind of want to add to my comment before, that if we know what some of the costs are for things, and that is made extremely transparent, then we're able to make more informed decisions. Something like what we have coming up in September, that's a more difficult situation for me to find a friend who's going to let me surf on their couch for that, and I want to be on site for that conference. Whereas I'm willing to take that possibility for maybe something else that we might have going on in Madison. You know, if I need to make my own accommodations, whether that is going to be like a cheaper Airbnb or, you know, seeing if I can stay with a friend or whatever it might be in order to be able to attend some of the ambassador things. So knowing that stuff ahead of time is going to be really important in making those decisions. And then secondly, I have a question. Was it discussed at all in this that we would be just having it be across the board allowed that supervisors would be able to attend WCA and legislative, and then anything extraneous would just come through the board? Was that ever an option that was discussed?
No.
Okay.
Was Ken able to come up with numbers? I almost made that comment as well.
So what we are able to break out in terms of, like, for the expenses is where I mentioned before where we average. So we average, again, I don't have it broken down by any individual. So if you're looking for what we spent total in terms of like registration and lodging, on average, we're about $16,000 in 2018. That did not include the mileage. If I'd add in then also the meals related to that, puts us around $16,500 in terms of expenses.
That's a grand total, or that's the...
Correct. Again, it doesn't include mileage related to that.
So we're unable to figure out the total dollar value of the percentage that is above the 1,500.
Correct, by individual, like, we could, but it'd be an extensive effort. So for example, if we did 2018 WCA, Jill just blocks the rooms, you know, based off all the people that are attending. I mean, we could go back and itemize every single person that went and start building in a sheet that shows that, but right now it's just blocked in as one expense for the hotels at WCA, so.
Well, other departments have to itemize stuff. Why isn't this committee, this department, which is the Department of 21?
Well, we do have it itemized by county board, but I don't have it itemized to Supervisor Engel, for example, in terms of your expenses related to that. We could, in essence, do that, but.
And if this passes after this year, you'd have it.
You'd have it after this year.
Well, I remember our discussion with moving it into the committees, into the department's head direction for the sake of tracking was supposed to imply we were going to have a better set of tracking, and apparently we haven't resolved that either.
Well, I don't know that the tracking was based on an individual. It was based on training dollars within the department being controlled by the department as opposed to outside when it was shifted in there. So I don't recall that we were talking about every individual was itemized within the department. but-
Just a better tracking concept. So then are we able to determine, let's take RPC planning, are we able to determine how much training they had planned on and how much training was actually spent on the supervisor side of it, the committee side of it?
As you go back to your, let's say your respective committees, you should be able to ask them in their budget what they have budgeted for as supervisor expenses related to conferences. That should be in there. But again, it's not done by individual, it's done by
bulk.
By bulk. So they'll say, okay, we're estimating that 3 supervisors will go to this conference, they'll average 2 nights, and this is what we're projecting for meals, and that's
Purely
built
on
into their
budget, but not on actual.
Correct. And that's projected in each one's budget at the department level.
Megan?
I feel like we're being asked to make kind of a blind decision right here because we don't even necessarily know who this is going to affect based on what the status quo is. And I would propose that we actually do have some sort of document that gives us transparency as to who has been spending what where. Not with judgment, but just so we have a very clear picture of who's been attending what and what those costs are. And I understand that may take some doing, but if that's what we would be doing moving forward, then not having that information and deciding, hey, that's just what we're going to do now, seems like blind decision making to me. So I'm a little concerned about why that is the case. If this has been on the docket, like, are we not wanting to see how much money certain folks have been spending? I want to see. I want to know, not from a judgment standpoint, but let's take a look at it all and find out what the value of everything that we've been using taxpayer money on, where it's going, and moving forward. If we're going to be making decisions on that like this, I think that's important information.
Biz?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can see that if a supervisor attends all 3 of the approved conferences by rule, it's WCA and the other 2, the hotel registration and the registration fee would probably going to exceed the $1,200. And especially for those that would be like on the LCC or Soil and Water Committee that attend an annual conference, you're going to go way over the $1,200. So you're limiting your spending there to, you might have been okay at 15, but you're not going to be okay at 12.
So what we can do is we can try and do some more research on it. I just find this interesting because last month, the majority of you said, come back to us this month with the $1,500 rule separate and apart. So we've done that. Okay. We don't have a lot of this detail because it hasn't existed in the past. They can go in and search and spend some time doing that, which is fine. We have to November meeting to finalize this one way or another. Okay. So if you want to, what we would table it at this point?
Yes.
Table at this point, ask for some more information, hope to be able to come back with some more in September, October, to answer some more of the questions.
Mr. Chairman.
I just find it interesting that. Yes, John?
Going back to what Supervisor Burley was saying, is we have no direction as far as what constitutes a program that we want to attend to, such as the WCA or the LCC annual conferences. I mean, what's important? Are we requiring anybody to pick or choose? I'm going to go back to the $1,500 mark and say, well, we're up above that. You need to decide if you're going to go to LCC or WCA. I don't see anything language-wise that dictates that to this board membership. I don't know if that's something we should do or shouldn't do. We have, highway annual meetings. We've got LCC annual meetings. Law enforcement could do the same thing, but I don't know anybody that goes to a law enforcement conference per se. So I'm just questioning the validity of what we are going to versus need to go to or want to go to. I would like to see some type of language if we're going to change things.
And there may be some confusion on what were the approved ones.
Correct.
Okay? I mean, basically, that approved ones would go away, and it'd be up to you to decide what is your approved conferences that you want to go to. I mean, lots of times you go to fall conferences, let's tell it like it is. People come back and say, you know what, that was a total waste of time. I'm not going to go anymore. I'm going to go every other year. Same thing with legislative days. That was a waste of time. Why are we sending everybody down there? Well, now you have an option to decide which ones you want to go to. And if you'd rather go to LCC ones or other safety ones or whatever, that would be what you would use your $1,200 for. It would be your choice, as opposed to having approved ones that everybody has and thinks they need to go to.
Correct.
And just, Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would also look for a little more clarification on then, if you were approaching that limit, there was some mention that, okay, maybe you could get approval, and I do think about the being WC ambassador, that's 3 trips to Madison besides the other things, which so far I've found them very valuable, and I do think we're value added. We're bringing back important things to the board here and to the county. So I would want a little more clarification on what would be the procedure to, I guess, ask for more expenditure, and then is that come before the full county board, or is that you as chair? I don't know who makes that decision. So maybe if we get more clarification on a procedure, that would be helpful too.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so Ken?
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At 1,500, everybody was going to be okay with it. Now at 1,200, now there's a lot of negativity out there. All we're saying is for the first time ever, we're putting some restrictions on your conferences you go to. It's not that open checkbook anymore. You know when your next conference is coming. You know it's all up there. We know when the conferences for, let's say, highway. We know when our conferences for highway are 5 years in advance. WCA would be the same thing. You know a year in advance. You know the cost it's going to be. You plot it out. Okay, here, I've got this much money to spend, whether $12, $15, or even $2,000. You plan it out the first of the year. Okay, I want to go to this one. Let's going to see what's the cost going to be. Now it's on us to regulate ourselves instead of just carte blanche, we just go. So I don't understand the hesitation here. I just don't understand it, and what Mr. Hennigle is asking for makes no difference. We're all, that's what's happened in the past. Now we're all going to be regulated. And maybe that's the situation, that none of us want to be regulated. If that's the case, then somebody needs to make a motion to say, nope, we're going to open up that checkbook, go whenever we want, wherever we want, and that's it. And let it go and see if that passes. Because that's what this argument has become, as I see it, that nobody wants to curtail themselves. I don't understand the hesitation.
Megan?
Maybe I can help explain that a little bit more. I most definitely feel that we should be regulated. And I feel that those decisions should be, and I can speak for myself on this, I feel like those decisions should be very informed decisions. The difference for me, and I apologize for not having thought of it earlier, but the difference for me is most definitely between that 1,200 and that 1,500, because that has spurred in me, okay, I don't know what all of these cost for me. You've been on this board a lot longer than I have. I'm in my second term. We've got a lot of folks in their first term. We don't know what those costs are, actually. So, and we don't necessarily know who's going to what in other committees. And so I think there most definitely should be some regulation. At that $1,500 mark, it felt pretty comfortable that we would still be able to, work around and attend some things that we were already attending. And if the idea for doing this was spurred on by 2, 3, or 4 supervisors that were consistently going over that, then, and nobody wanted to talk about that, but somebody's aware of it, then that was going to nip them in the bud. And that, I really truly think that was the case. Now, if we go from 15 to 12, then we're actually having an effect on more than just those folks. So that's where I'm coming from. I most definitely feel like it should be regulated.
I want to make a comment. This was not to nip 2 or 3 people in the bud.
Okay.
This had more to do with people who are asking all the time about what they could do as far as attending additional conferences. I was being contacted weekly about, I want to do this conference, that conference, whatever. It's not on the approved list, but I want approval to do this. And they would justify it. Okay? And anybody could do
Gotcha.
that. But it wasn't, we weren't looking at 2 or 3 people that were exceeding something.
All right.
That there was nothing to exceed.
I appreciate that because there have been whispers since day one of so-and-so spending so much more money than other supervisors or this person or that person. So if that was part of it,
And I want, I'll respond to that.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to
no, I appreciate it.
People that were spending a lot of money, it wasn't related to going to conferences that weren't part of a committee. Most of it had to do with committee issues.
Okay.
Committee conferences, committee travel, committee issues like that. It wasn't they were going to all kinds of outside conferences that were not directly county committee related. Most of it was related to committee requirements or travel.
Okay, thank you.
David?
Personally, if somebody believes they have a problem with the 1,200, I don't have a problem with either one of them. Like Megan, I believe that there's reasonable transparency needed in general. To change gears, if we can at this moment, I want to have clarification on page 52, subsection 7, miscellaneous. I think there's a verbiage written wrong in one. Board A meeting at the end. I'm not sure what that means.
Where are you looking, Dave?
Subsection 7F1, some members are eligible to receive per diem for any committee, commission, or board, and then the word "a" meeting.
It should be a board instead of board A.
Just get rid of A.
That's what I figured is the word "a" has to go away. That's the way I was interpreting the intent.
Okay, so we will table this, and we'll bring it back with additional information.
Do we not need a motion to table?
Yes, we will. I got hands raised in the back end. Bob?
Just a procedural question, thank you, Mr. Chairman. With a motion on, so it was amended to the 1,200?
Correct.
Is that what's being tabled, or does the whole thing start over, or?
No, it's being tabled at the 1,200.
Okay, I'm just curious,
Correct.
procedurally.
Right.
Yep, thank you.
Well, we had the vote on the 1,200.
Right.
Yes,
So now it's the whole thing being tabled.
Correct.
correct,
It's just that's been amended with the 1,200.
correct. Laura?
I'd just like to make a comment. I think if we're talking about having a procedure, a policy with this, as being a fairly newer member than some of the other members, I think it is beneficial that we know what other people are attending, that there are certain committees that have annual meetings that they attend to. For example, if there's issues or questions that constituents have to me, I look at my resources on who and where I can go to ask those questions. So I look at who's on certain boards, if I can call them and ask them questions. If supervisors are doing extra and I think that's great that they can choose instead of just approved training to get more diversified information. It's wonderful. I like to know that, so then I can call them up and ask them more specific questions to that. So to some extent, regulation or non-regulation, hey, I just think it's great to know what our fellow supervisors are doing, and if I can reach out to them for more information, I think that's wonderful.
Okay. John?
So we're tabling this because somebody can't make up their mind what's important and not important to attend?
There's been a number of people that have asked for information that we don't have available without further digging.
Well, I thought maybe they couldn't make up their mind and prioritize what was most important to the taxpayer.
As far as I'm concerned, I think you have a supermajority vote here for this topic. My information is not necessarily, that I've asked for, is not necessarily interested to the rest of the committees. I'm just simply asking, and it wasn't available. I don't know that you need to table it.
I call for the question.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll second it.
So basically, we're going to vote on the amended motion.
Correct. It requires a supermajority for it to pass.
We will go to the voter board. has passed on a supermajority, which was required of 17 yes, 3 no, and 1 vacant. We won't be tabling tonight. Megan?
Can we still get that information, please?
I agree. This is, if you're going to set a value somewhere, you need to have them. I've always questioned how you accomplished making those decisions.
All right.
Thank you, Dan.
Ordinances. Report, comprehensive zoning ordinance text amendment. Mr. Fisher.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll make a motion that we accept the report to the Door County Board of Supervisors for the text amendment to the Door County Comprehensive Zoning Ordinance.
Second.
And it says there, the explanation is reorganize and clarify existing regulations regarding campgrounds, delete outdated regulations or matters governed by the state, better match new state regulations, and allow electricity and plumbing in camping cabins. One minor amendment regarding the amount of time camping can occur on private property is also proposed.
Any further explanation? Ken? Any further explanation?
Oh, no. It's just. it's
I would like
report.
some further explanation, because I clearly do not understand what brought this up, or why we're looking to change the way it is.
Okay, I think Mariah's back to give a more detail. Or is she not? Oh, yes, she is.
Good morning. Probably about 5 years ago, the state completely overhauled its campground regulations, and we had met at that time with the inspector for the Door County campgrounds to learn what those changes were going to be. The only amendment that we made in the near term after that was about 2 years ago, and that had to do with how long a camping unit in a campground could be occupied by the same person. So both the state and the county used to say that those units could only be occupied by 4 months. Now, the reality was that we knew that there were lots of camping units and lots of camping grounds in the county that were being occupied for far more than 4 months, and it was just not being policed by us or the state because we didn't have the time. So at that time, that was the only change that we made to the campground regulations, was to change that unit occupancy period from 4 to 8 months. So we had intended to do further amendments because our regulations were pretty outdated and hadn't really been looked at much in probably 17 years at least. So the first page of the actual, and I know this is the attachment to your ordinance, but that's what you might want to go to, where it starts off with the Chapter 4 language.
Page 55.
I don't have the page numbers, but yes.
Page
Okay.
55 in our packet.
So that first page, and as always, when we do text amendments, things that are in black are the existing regulations. Things that are in red are being proposed to be changed. If it's got that overstrike function, then that means that's something that we're looking to have deleted. In this particular case, you also have some modifications that are being recommended by the Resource Planning Committee compared to what was offered for public hearing. So those modifications that the RPC is recommending are in green. So on that first page, there's only a couple of substantive changes on that page other than just kind of eliminating redundant language. One is that instead of a requirement for vegetative screening to be able to be waived by me, we're recommending that it be waived by the Resource Planning Committee rather than staff. Another, the green change there with regard to dwelling units regarding units that can be on the campground that are occupied by the owner and the manager, that's a clarification that the RPC came up with. It doesn't change the actual intent of that. It's just that you can have one dwelling for an owner and a manager. The substantive change on that page actually came out of the RPC meeting, and that is that the recommendation to change the number of campsites that are allowed in a campground on a per acre basis overall should go from 15 to 10. So you'll see that 10 in green font there. Does anybody have any questions about the first page before we move on? Okay. On the second page, the very top of the page where it says, and this would be, the red was the brand new language that was suggested, and this has to do with what are called camping cabins, or what the state calls camping cabins. They're also sometimes called park models or shelter units. So what we're proposing is that campsites that are going to accommodate such camping cabins need to be designated on any campground site plan so that when people know, or when a campground is proposed, we would know which ones are going to have those actual camping cabins. The language that the Resource Planning Committee came up with to propose at the public hearing, in addition to what went to hearing, was that they felt that camping cabins should only be placed on 20% of the number of the proposed campsites within a campground. And to be clear, they wanted to say that camping cabins could be wired for electricity and may contain plumbing for toilets, sinks, and bathtubs and showers. Right now, in the current zoning ordinance, we do allow, they're called camping shelters in the current ordinance, not camping cabins. We do allow those camping shelters, but they're technically not supposed to have wiring or plumbing. Now, we've heard since we started writing these text amendments in the last year that apparently there are a lot of camping cabins out there in some campgrounds that have wiring and plumbing, but we're not running around monitoring every campsite at every campground to find out what's going on. So that's one of the main changes that came out of, actually I think it's pretty much the main change that came out of Resource Planning Committee compared to what was actually proposed. The only other substantive changes, because you'll see a lot of red when you look at this, and mostly what we're doing is rearranging the chapter to attempt to make it more clear and to, in some cases, better match the state. Another new substantive item is sub I on that same page, where it says that an application for a campground permit needs to show, again, the camping cabins that might be on that property, and then any potential future sheds or decks or patios, which are all already allowed in campgrounds, but they need to show those on the site plan so that we can get an accurate impervious surface ratio calculation, because a lot of times that stuff all shows up later and we don't know about it, and then it messes up the stormwater runoff control systems. The other changes on the rest of that page are really just reorganizational and don't change how we've been regulating things. And then again, moving on to the third page of text with regard to campgrounds, same thing. That stuff has mostly just been rearranged or deleted. In some cases, the state has regulations that kind of supersede some of the stuff that we're doing anyway. So that's for campgrounds, that's what's being proposed. So I think the big changes are and some of this is from RPC, some of it is from what was proposed for hearing, are to change from 15 to 10 units per acre to allow camping cabins with wiring and plumbing, but then to limit those to only 20% of the campsites in a campground. And then the rest is just reorganizing.
Ryan, could you just provide clarification on why it was selected for the 20%? Is it a groundwater issue? Is it, what was the logic behind doing that process or doing that limitation?
The original proposal that went to public hearing didn't have a percentage at all. It just was going to try and reflect the reality that there are camping cabins out there already that have wiring and plumbing, and the reality that the state allows wiring and plumbing in camping cabins, and a campground can be comprised entirely of camping cabins. So that original proposal wasn't worrying about a percentage, but the discussion at the Resource Planning Committee really focused on the idea that there could be a campground comprised entirely of those camping cabins that were wired and plumbed, and people were concerned about that. So the number, I think, was there were a couple different numbers batted around. I think that was more or less a compromise when the motion was made.
And a camping cabin is limited in size to 400 square feet? Is that
Correct,
right?
and that's a state regulation. So I think when, well, this is my theory, but when the state redid their regulations 5 years ago, my theory is that they just kind of ran around and reflected the reality that was out there. So again, allowing camping cabins to have wiring and wiring and plumbing. That 400 square foot number has been in the state code for years. That was also talked about at the RPC level because at least one of the towns wanted us to increase that number, which in theory we could, but anybody that would be applying, you have to apply for a state permit as well if you're doing a campground, and the state would then turn around and say, no, you can't have units that are bigger than 400 square feet. So it doesn't really make sense for us to allow something bigger because it would be confusing and misleading. But yeah, that 400 square foot number comes from the state. And frankly, as best we can tell from the way the statutes got rewritten 4 or 5 years ago, as long as it's 400 square feet or less in anything that calls itself a campground where it's only occupied for 8 months, the state considers it a camping unit. It could be a tiny home, it could be a tent, it could be an RV, it could be a pop-up trailer, it could be a camping cabin with or without plumbing and wiring. I think they've just kind of just said it's too hard to regulate or too hard to monitor, I guess.
Can I ask a question on that?
Sure.
So if that's the state law, I mean, there's many campgrounds around here that have park models and larger things in them that are well over 400 square feet. I've been to them, I know.
Yeah, and we, so a lot of the campgrounds that are in Door County are not in county zoning, which is one thing. So, and we haven't done, nor do I really want to do right now, an inventory of campgrounds in like 17 years. Like if you scroll through some of the text that's in front of you, you can see whenever we make an amendment or a change, we put a parenthetical aside as to what year it was. And you'll notice there's a bunch of things from like maybe 2002, 2003. And I think those relate to the wood platforms and the screen houses and the patios and things. And that's because when we did an inventory of the campgrounds in zoning, 17 years ago, rather than try and go after umpteen violations, we just said, fine, we're gonna change the text and allow, you know, patios and screen rooms and some of that other stuff. So I wouldn't doubt that there are plenty of camping units out there that are larger than 400 square feet. So it's probably either that it's not in zoning or we just frankly don't know about it.
Well, as a sidebar of that, I mean, there's some RVs that are bigger than 400 square feet.
Right, and that, we talked about that too, and that's, right.
Yeah.
And again, we talked about whether or not we should, and we're not gonna run around on Saturdays and measure people's pop-outs with their RVs, you know, with the rooms that expand and everything else, but the reality is that that is the number that the state has, and so, again, if we were to put a larger number in there for whatever the camping unit is, I think it would be misleading for them trying to go through their state approvals.
If I may, that's the topic that came up. In my mind, the manufacturers of these RVs, campers, all that stuff, their technology is morphed to where they're capable of being larger than 400 square feet once they're expanded out, and the state's laws are just not aware of it.
Right, and you'll notice when you go through the last page of the actual text changes, we did add for the first time a definition of recreational vehicle in the ordinance, and that matches the state as well, even though, as we understand it, there may be RVs that are out there that are longer than 45 feet.
How many there is.
Susan?
I'm wondering if Grant might explain our role versus the role of the RPC in making this decision, and questions about people who have emailed us and the testimony that might have been given today, and how all of that plays into this, or at least for the new members of this board.
Yeah, briefly, the statutes require a public hearing. The public hearing is held before the zoning committee. In Door County, the zoning committee is a resource planning committee. Considerations of fairness and, quite frankly, due process require that everything be presented during the course of the public hearing. When it comes to the county board, it really is just intended for discussion among county board members, and it would be contrary to the notion of fairness and contrary to due process considerations if we were to allow people to, in effect, introduce evidence and testimony at the county board, because this isn't a public hearing.
So what you're saying is, we shouldn't read the emails we get, and we shouldn't talk to anybody who calls us or sees us in the grocery store about this.
Well, I can't tell you that, but it's akin to, if any of you have ever been involved with a jury trial, and it happens pretty much in every trial where some evidence comes in and the judge rules that it wasn't admissible and instructs the jury, even though you heard that, you are to disregard that, and that's the position you find yourselves in. You have to get rid of all that extraneous stuff. And
can I add a comment to that?
Sure.
Just so everybody knows, because I don't think that you all get copied on this, but after the Resource Planning Committee meeting, when a map or a text amendment is coming to county board, we send a copy of a letter to the clerks for the towns that are affected, which in this case is any of the towns in zoning, and then we copy everybody who testified at whatever the particular hearing is, and we actually have a sentence in there that says, you know, you may not offer testimony at the county board meeting or in the interim, but it's not always heeded.
Bob?
Well, and I appreciate that, but, I mean, this is not a jury trial, this is the well-being of our county we're talking about. And I've really been struggling with, I mean, I think the majority of this is great. I think we're moving in the right direction. I'm a little, I guess, I don't know what to think, that if every time we go to look at campgrounds, oh, they're doing it anyway, so now we just make another rule. Well, there's no enforcement, nothing matters here. You know, that's the part where I'm like, geez, I mean, if they were doing it in 2002 and then we expanded it to, but they're doing it, and so there's no, it's just, we're just talking about a pile of jello in your hands here. So I don't even, part of me doesn't even know why we're even dealing with this, because if it doesn't matter and these rules aren't enforced, what's the difference? But we are really talking about a major watershed change for how people might spend time and live on this peninsula. And campgrounds are, you know, a lot of people, that might concentrate a lot of people in one place. And if we're talking plumbing and electric now, I mean, I guess we could say, well, it's allowed, or people are doing it anyway, even though it's against the rules, so we'll just make the rules. But then, like we just heard, over the years, the rules have never mattered anyway. So I'm not even sure what to say. I feel like I think this is maybe not a fully baked idea. I guess that's maybe where I feel like we need a little more time to hammer this out, or maybe decide, are we going to enforce these things or not? Because if we're not going to enforce them, then why even have ordinances?
I don't mean to make it sound like we're not enforcing anything.
Well,
I know Mr. Fisher wants to chime in, but the reality is that people put up patios and screen rooms and wood decks and platforms and things like that at campsites, and we never see it or hear about it.
Sure.
If someone actually calls us and asks what the rules are, or if the campground owner understands the rules and is responsible and checks with us, then we do issue permits and authorizations where required. The thing that, whether or not there are camping cabins in county zoning that have wiring and plumbing, we wouldn't necessarily know, because that's not something that they need to come to us for a zoning permit. So we're not just kind of throwing up our hands and saying we're going to do this because everybody's doing it anyway. As I explained, when we met with the state 4 or 5 years ago, it's pretty clear that the state has just said, you know what, if it's 400 square feet or less, we don't care what it is, it can be a camping unit, and we're going to regulate it as a campground. Because you can pull in an RV and hook up to wiring and plumbing in a campground, or you could have a building that's got wiring and plumbing, or you could be in a tent and go to a communal building that's got, you know, showers or whatever else. I mean, there's a mixture at all sorts of different campsites. And it's not that it's not being regulated. We do go through a really thorough application and hearing process when they're first established. It's after they're established that we often struggle to keep up. So, sorry, Ken, I think I interrupted you.
I want to point something out, because I think there's some confusion here also, what's bleeding into this. There is a potential proposal by somebody to put some J1 student housing in place that I think this is being mixed into as far as the conversation goes, which has to go with the letters that everybody's receiving and everything else. Was any of that part of this ordinance change?
No.
We were already working on this before. Well, we don't even have an application for that proposal yet. We were already working on these text amendments. Like I said, we started talking about this a couple of years ago. What's being proposed here today will affect them on one particular provision negatively and one positively. So.
Tim.
The point I wanted to, thank you. The point I wanted to bring up in regards to Mr. Boltman's comment, it's not willy-nilly on this. I mean, if they're putting plumbing up, they still have to abide by all the other codes that are out there pertaining, that the county has in force. Okay? It's not that, well, they're putting it up in a campground, so we're letting them put the refuse down a sinkhole. That's not the case.
Are we sure about that? I'm hearing that we don't have enough enforcement of our campgrounds. That's what I'm hearing. I think we need another employee to be taking care of campgrounds.
If I had another employee, that's not what we'd be doing with them.
But I get my point. You know, like, this is not sure. We are not sure. We don't know what's going on there.
Anything that is going to have wiring or plumbing in it is going to be regulated by the town and by the town's building code. And then if it is on a private septic system, it's also regulated by the sanitary division of my department, which I should point out, and we talked about this at the Resource Planning Committee as well, whether or not you've got a 50-unit campground that has 50 tents or 50 RV sites, you're still going to have the same septic system, because either everybody's going to be walking over to the main bathroom if they're all staying in tents and using that bathroom, or they're going to be hooked in through their RVs, whether it's through a dump station or the individual RV stays, because you can hook at some campgrounds into an individual thing with your RV and get rid of your waste that way. So it doesn't really affect the size or type of sanitary system that's going to go on the property at all, and how that gets regulated, which is through my department, and the state, I should say.
Question, David? So,
Go ahead, Benny.
Can you just clarify as far as where are campsites allowed in county zoning, like what type of zoning? And then it's my understanding that any campsite has to go through a conditional use permit process.
Correct. So I can grab the actual ordinance if you want me to rattle off all the zoning districts, but I believe they're allowed, campgrounds are allowed in the recreational, commercial, probably high density district, I'd have to look. And then they're allowed in largely what people would consider probably the agricultural districts. So like general agriculture, the heartland districts, I think a state, no, not a state. If you want me to actually get the list, I would say there's probably 8 districts that allow campgrounds, at least.
Under county zoning.
Under county, yes, yeah, and thank you. So yes, under county zoning, there's about probably 8, and I can get the exact number in the list if you want, zoning districts that allow campgrounds. And yes, to establish either a new campground or to expand the number of sites within an existing campground, you need a conditional use permit, which is a public hearing before the Resource Planning Committee. The town receives a copy of the application and gets to review, you know, whatever, and comment on whatever they would like to comment on, and then the Resource Planning Committee holds the hearing and makes the decision.
Joel?
So for clarification purposes, then, a campground establishment that's under county zoning obviously is gonna fall under the rules, regulations, jurisdiction of the county, period. It's covered, it's watched, it's regulated, I get that. Ones that aren't under the county zoning, they're under the town or village zoning, there still has to be mechanisms in place, whether it's via the town, the village, or the state that oversees the rules and regulations for their developments. It's not a free-for-all even in those places.
Right,
So there has to be rules.
And the state is also regulating and monitoring the ones that are in county zoning as well. And I don't know what kind of an inspection schedule he's on, but there is a person that's assigned to Door County that monitors campgrounds, among other things.
I just kind of have a follow-up, because like everybody, I mean, I don't get emails very often as a board member, being on the island. I got emails on this, and I was intrigued, and I was happy that I got emails. I actually talked to some of the people about it. I camp, my family, we travel, we go all over the place, so this is something that I take an interest in. And personally, I don't think what's being proposed here is unrealistic and is not bad. Now, there's obviously concerns from people, constituents throughout the county that maybe don't know all the facts and figures and rules and whatever, what's going on or doesn't happen or should happen or isn't happening, whatever. But personally speaking, I see no problem with this at all, because I've been to these. I know them. They're just not, unless somebody's cheating the system and breaking the laws, that's another consequence. But what's happening at the ones that I'm aware of all over the county are fine, and I utilize them myself. So I have no problem with this. So I'm in favor of what's going on here. But I certainly understand where people are thinking that maybe things are being skirted and dodged and all this stuff, and there's a problem with that if that's happening. You know, so that I have a concern with, and that should be followed up on if that's the case or the insight that's happening. But at the end of the day, you know, I think this is a very positive thing. And to lead into the J1 program thing, because that's what was in the paper, I mean, I read that stuff. Personally speaking, this potentially could solve a seasonal problem for stuff. So I don't see a problem if the rules are followed. It's just my opinion on this. So, and thanks to everybody that's emailed. Learn a little bit.
Sure, I just wanted to, again, Mariah, I'm kind of leading you, but I'm going to go back to the changes. So a lot of the changes are clarifications and cleanup, but there's primarily some substantive changes. One is the density, which if you'd ask Mariah, our density, I don't think we're having an issue where we're denying people campgrounds. The other part is the 20%, and I'm going to refer the question back to making sure we stay within the testimony, within the rules. So that'd be the only thing I've heard as far as clarification of where the logic came for introducing of the 20%, because is the 20% being introduced so we're limiting people to follow the restriction to the 8 months of living on site? Because part of the other argument that could be done is from a groundwater protection and sanitary standpoint, that's not the most logical decision to go. So if you have people that can hook up the sanitary and it's going to a treatment field, that's a much better system for us groundwater-wise versus people in their tent taking out their groundwater and dumping it back into woods. So I just want to, I'm leading you because I think that needs to be clarified of where that 20% came from, because that does have an impact as far as a substantive change of why we're changing that to a 20% versus allowing them to do more hookups to sanitary or electrical. So I think you need to clarify that part.
So the 20%, so what was proposed to the Resource Planning Committee was to allow camping cabins to have wiring and plumbing. Right now, they're technically not allowed to have that. We know some do, but, and the state allows them to have wiring and plumbing. The discussion at RPC was concerned over the possibility of having a campground that would be entirely comprised of camping cabins. And so then that was when they decided that they wanted to limit the percentage of campsites that could be comprised of a camping cabin in a campground. That was a lot of words of camping. Does that make sense to everybody? So right now, someone could come in and apply for a campground that was 100% camping cabins. But those camping cabins would not be allowed under zoning, under county zoning, to be wired and plumbed. After this goes into effect, which I should say, because this is, you've got the green language or modifications there coming from RPC, the state law says that this isn't going to go into effect today when you vote on it, assuming you vote. It goes into effect in 40 days, so there's a lag there where the old rules are still in place. But right now, somebody could apply for a campground that is 100% camping cabins. After this goes into effect in early October, I didn't count out the days, they would only be able to, for a new campground, propose 20% of the sites to be camping cabins. But those camping cabins would get to have wiring and plumbing.
Ken?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The discussion in Mr. Renigo and Mr. Cook can correct me if I'm wrong.
You're never wrong, Ken.
You're never right either.
Always good to be well thought of by your peers. Anyway.
Or at least thought of.
Anyway, the discussion came up as to how many, and I think we were all concerned about the fact that somebody could buy enough land and set up enough under the old system with 15 campsites per acre, that they could have a little corner that's these small, for tents or what have you, the 15 sites, and then the rest be this huge complex of the cabins. We didn't like that, so we decided to limit it to 10 per acre, which according to Mariah was not even being achieved by any of the campsites. Most of them had fewer than that. So but it wasn't on the book. So we decided on, it had to be 10 per acre. And then we had a discussion on these cabins, and some of us wanted to have a little higher percentage and some not. And we had a discussion, and we compromised and did it the way Representative Cook wanted to do it, and we settled on 20%. Is that correct?
You are correct again.
And it seemed like,
Mr. Fisher.
And it seemed like a good balance. It really did. And I'm okay with it. I think it's a good balance for any new campsite coming in.
David?
And to add to Supervisor Fisher's comments, he's partially correct. In my way of looking at it was, we had the statistics of how many campgrounds we had the statistics of how many units per acre there were there. And the new change was not going to adversely affect any of the historically existing campgrounds we knew, and what was being presented and what has been presented a few years ago. Within the last couple of years, they all fit within those numbers. Same thing in my mind with the percentage of cabins was also that in those campgrounds that had cabins, those ratios were still there, reasonably close to that 20% range as well. So it was based, in my mind, reviewing some of the existing county-wide activities that are going on. As far as the sanitary goes, most of the campgrounds I've done in the last few years that I've personally been on site, the new ones are being built with sanitary and water. Even for the campground, even for the campers, the RVs, they are being built with the sewer and water hookups already there. And that's my logic to why there's no logic in not allowing them to have the cabins with effectively the exact same thing, just fixed in place. And another reminder, this is just the report we're talking about at the moment.
Well, one last follow-up then, if, I think there's confusion that's, at least in my mind also, if somebody wants to develop something on a piece of property, maybe it's the terminology of a campground. If somebody's gonna put down straight up fixed cabins or whatnot, to me, who camps, that's not a campground.
Agreed.
That's a subdevelopment, of whatever you wanna call it, you know? And maybe just clarification on terminology and definitions on stuff would ease the mind on what's being proposed and gonna be brought forward as far as what a development could be.
Penny?
That again gets to the explanation of why we came about to a compromise of 20%, because we felt that 100% of a campground developed at 15 per acre or 10 per acre even would not look like what you would expect a campground to look like if you were, and then where do you get into that's a housing development, even if it's only 8 months out of the year. It's a new thing. As housing is being proposed and we're looking at solutions for it, it's a new way to look at a campground or to not look at a campground. And I think this was just a first step towards trying to define the difference. So.
Bob?
And so that's a really good question that I was going to ask is, Mariah, from the state or from the state's perspective, is the word camping defined or is it a statutory thing? So, because that's what I guess it is confusing, and I wish we could leave that term, we could separate the two, because again, we're kind of at this watershed moment, or in this watershed period where, yeah, it's totally changing what a campground is, so can we call it something different, or, I mean, can we call a tiny house and a tent a tent, or, I don't know, you know?
No, actually, almost every code that I've looked at around the state and the country, tiny homes are camping units, unless you're taking it off the wheels and plopping it on a foundation and turning it into a building, and so.
Still calling it camping.
Yeah, so it's still camping.
Okay.
And you'll note the last page has definitions, and again, we're not changing any of the definitions. Like I said, we're adding a definition of RV. We're cleaning up the campground and camping definitions to hopefully make it less confusing and better match the state, but it doesn't substantively change. But yeah, it's the state that says that it's temporary, meaning well, Dave could probably explain better what that means in terms of building code, because that's, I think, the big difference. If you're going to build something that's a camping cabin, it has different standards that it needs to meet at the building code level than it does at
At a very minimal level, really. The reality is, as I also looked it up, there is no way for if you're looking at camping by your definition, my definition, Supervisor Cook's, Supervisor Fisher's definition, we all camp, and a site that is proposed with nothing but fixed-in-place dwellings. The state doesn't look at it differently. If you propose it as a campground, it's a campground. Then you have to follow the campground rules.
And I would just add one of the main campground rules that would affect that is the number of people that can be on the campsite versus in a building development, that would be less limited, is that right?
No, those are the same. So the state already has for years, and so has the county ordinance said that there's a maximum, well, all right, let's figure out what the definition is. It basically comes down to, on average, 6 people per campsite, although if you are a family that has a lot of children, then I think you can have, a family or group consisting of not more than 6 persons or 7.
For years.
Yeah, so if you have a really big family, you might be in violation, but if you're all older than 7. But yeah, it's basically 6 people per campsite, and that's now, and in the future, we're not proposing to change that, and the state, I don't think, has changed that either.
One more, I'm sorry. So how does campsite versus a building development deal with, because I think sanitarians deal with number of bedrooms to size the system. So do they deal with number of campsites and assume that 6 people are sleeping in 1 bedroom? How does, maybe you don't know
Well,
that, but
I think, it's different. So if when someone's applying for a private sanitary system for a house, then yes, we look at the number of bedrooms and size accordingly. If you're applying for something that's considered a more commercial or recreational or institutional use, then they're going to look at the occupancy capacity of that entity, and then that would be how the system would get sized.
Thank
you. Megan, did you have?
No.
Okay. Helen?
Well, I just don't really see the difference. I guess it's a slightly more permanent, but how many people buy a trailer, put a camper, put it on a lot, never move it? That's their summer vacation home. you know, I don't see there's a whole lot of difference between that and, you know, a camping cabin per se. Slightly more mobile, but maybe not much. It's not, so I don't really see.
That reminds me of, we do now and in the future, well, we do now, and the state does, and in these text amendments, you're correct that you can leave your camping unit there year-round in a campground. You can also leave it on your private property. I forgot, there's one other small amendment that's gotten kind of lost in the shuffle here at the bottom of the third page. We also regulate camping on private property, so like if you have vacant land, and that you're limited to a month. And we've, for whatever reason, in the ordinance for years had that 30 days in a calendar year limitation, but it's only supposed to be 15 consecutive, and the reality is we are not going out there after 15 days and telling you you've got to move your camper for a day and then you can come back. So we're just changing that to 30 days. But yes, you can leave your camping unit. Well, if you drive around campgrounds in the winter, I mean, there's lots of stuff that's in there.
Susan?
As long as we're talking definitions, what's a yurt?
They're awesome.
They're awesome, is that right? Megan might know. I would say it's a more solid tent, kind of, or maybe almost more like what people would call a teepee. Yeah, like there's usually kind of more of a platform and maybe a little bit of framing and then some sort of fabric-ish.
From the exterior, you'd have a hard time telling it's not a tent.
Yeah.
Other than people that know what they are.
They're round.
John?
Yeah, I'd like to note, I believe there is a distinction of movable camping units versus non-movable or fixed foundation camping units. And I agree with Mr. Gunlickson that if you provide just cabin camping, so-called camping, and it becomes a housing development, at which point the housing rules are different in zoning than they are for camping as far as size, placement, there's all kinds of other limitations there. And the third thought to that is once you have a housing development, you've got different tax base per unit than you do in a camping area where you're going to house so-called campers. I think there needs to be a distinction between a camp area or campgrounds and a camping unit versus permanent housing. And I realize we're looking for seasonal housing solutions. However, as those solutions become available as far as seasonal housing, they could easily turn into year-round housing. And now what have we done to a camping development versus a housing development issue? So I think there's a lot of good discussion that took place here today, but we need to stay focused what is a housing development versus what is camping. Megan?
Thank you. Along with that, Maria, are you able to give me or us a little bit of education on the pros and cons of the plumbing requirements, what the rules were, and what is being proposed, how that affects our soil and water?
I'm probably not going to be the expert on this. I mean, like I said, right now, you're not allowed in a campground under county zoning to have wiring or plumbing in one of those camping cabins. But that property is obviously going to have a sanitary system and places to shower and wash your hands, and lots of them have laundry, to be able to deal with the fact that there's no plumbing in that camping cabin. So again, if you were to allow wiring and plumbing in those camping cabins, the sanitary system's not going to be any different. It's just going to be that you're going to have more things kind of scattered around that would be potentially feeding into that system. I don't know if that's your question or not.
Kind of, I guess. Again, going back to that definition of camping, as soon as we're talking about there being plumbing and electricity in a camping cabin, it feels a lot less like camping to me. So I was wondering what the reason behind allowing plumbing and electricity in those cabins would be.
I think it was because the state now allows that, and the state, as we mentioned earlier, RVs can pull up to RV sites and hook into wiring and plumbing at many campgrounds. And again, those camping cabins are allowed by the state to have wiring and plumbing.
Joel?
So to piggyback on that, my final question, I think, would be is, by just pure happenstance, I suppose, the issue of the development, the building program for the J1 program, and this is probably all coming together as one giant culmination of the conversation, even though they may or may not have bearing on each other, but it has. So by county definition, for clarification, then, can somebody or furthermore, the one that's being talked about, is that in a county zoning area? I don't even know offhand.
Yes.
It is. Okay, so that's why this is raising flags then. Can somebody come in and develop that property or this proposal that is gonna be strictly tiny cabins? Or is there gonna be a percentage that has to have sites for tents on it? In this particular incident?
If the county board today votes to adopt what's in front of you, then up until the effective date of the ordinance, which granted, I don't know if you've counted out the 40 days, but let's say very early October, between now and then, somebody could still come in and apply for a campground that's comprised entirely of cabins. However, they would, under the current rules, not be able to have wiring or plumbing for them. Now, there have been campgrounds in the last couple of years that have come before the Resource Planning Committee where there have been camping cabins proposed as part of the project, and the RPC allowed them to stub in wiring and plumbing for those cabins in the event that the ordinance language changed. But technically, right now, if somebody came in to apply for all camping cabins, they could not be wired and plumbed.
Okay, so my last question. Knowing what you just said, if I heard you correctly, and that is possibly the intent of what these people want to do based on what the rules are going to be here, to me, that doesn't fall under the definition of a campground. Right? Like I said before, to me, we're now creating a development, a housing development. And based off of this last 20-minute conversation solely on that, is it urgent that this gets passed now, or do we go back and try and figure out a separate set of rules for something like this? I don't know. I don't have an answer, but to me, that's raising a red flag here now, because now we're looking at a subdevelopment versus a campgrounds, personally speaking.
Well, we tried really hard, and I'm trying really hard now to not talk about this specific project because we don't even have an application yet, and it doesn't feel fair because the applicants aren't here.
Yep.
But right now, somebody could come in and apply for a campground that's all camping cabins, because neither we nor the state have anything that prohibits that. We have rules that would say that those can't be wired and plumbed. The state has different rules. If these amendments, once these amendments go into effect, anybody that's turning in a new campground application would only be able to have 20% of the campsites as camping cabins, whether or not you allow wiring or plumbing in them. So if you didn't want to vote on anything today, the rules are that somebody can apply for a campground that is 100% camping cabins. They just can't get wired or plumbed, unless the Resource Planning Committee does something similar to what they've done with other.
And if we voted for this today, then they could do the same thing, but 20% of them would have to have tent sites on them.
No, it's the other way around.
Other way around.
80%, but again, remember,
80%
there's that lag. These aren't going to go into effect for 40 days.
Right.
So they could still apply in the next month.
So in essence, this is getting more restrictive than what is currently on the books.
Yes, for camping cabins.
Ken?
Other than the fact that you'll be able to have them wired and plumbed.
Well, the council hasn't objected yet, so it must be
Yeah.
okay. But I sense that Joel's questions are geared to a proposal that may or may not be coming in the future, that could come before the RPC and should not be discussed at this point in time. I'm getting a little nervous on that, and that's not part of the discussion on this.
And I'm the one who originally brought that up. I just wanted to clarify that. I think there was some confusion going on as to why this was on the docket now versus something that hasn't been
Right.
proposed yet.
It's actually, Joel used the right word, it's complete happenstance that these happen to be happening at the same time.
Vinnie?
I think that's just important to remember too, is that we shouldn't be talking about a specific project, but we should be talking about the potential of any project that would be impacted by an ordinance change. So it could be named fictional anything, but what is the potential of what someone could develop on a campsite based on this change, regardless of any proposal that may or may not ever come from anyone. It's just, what could the potential land use be with these rules create? So
Dave?
I think that makes it fair to talk about it
Sure.
in general.
To remind people here, this ordinance change is based on state changes that occurred, correct, Mariah?
Much of it,
Okay.
yeah.
And we were basically bringing our ordinance into compliance with the state. One of the reasons why we reference the 400 square feet, because that's what the state still references regardless of manufacturing capabilities. We also brought up items that we have experienced over the past few years, one of them being the cabins that by code currently written is not allowed to be plumb or have electricity in. And part of that conversation was, what's the difference if a 45-foot RV is parked there that can plug right into the sewer and water and electric? Or a cabin that's fixed in place? So those kinds of comments, so those are bringing our ordinance up to some of the requests that we've seen through the years. So even this other discussion, this other potential issues, those issues people have to remember, we cannot address that in my mind through our county ordinance. Those issues were a direct result of the state's changes in their statutes and their regulations of campgrounds that unfortunately, because of the way they wrote it and rewrote it, we don't have the ability to impose any changes to those kinds of regulations. Am I correct making that assumption?
Well, I mean, this isn't, the state statutes regarding campgrounds, we're not mandated to follow them exactly. So it's not like other sections of the state law that have been changed in recent years where we're absolutely required to regulate the way that they do. But it does make it extremely confusing when you've got two different entities that do authorize and permit campgrounds to have different rules. So that's, like I said, like if we wanted to do a larger than 400 square foot thing, that's going to make it confusing.
And what I'm referring to is the way the state defines a campground. Unfortunately, if you can find a way to fit your project within that definition,
then they're going to call it a
we are not allowed to make something that says that they can't do it that way, at least now with the current interpretation.
We probably couldn't under the way our ordinance is written, I guess, or under this one either. But
No win.
So we really need to go back, if you want a concern of what everybody thinks might be an abuse of a regulation, go back to your state legislatures and go after them and ask them, hey, this is the result we're seeing. And hopefully that puts the end of discussion on the other remaining.
Denny?
Just say like one difference I feel with Door County and why you might want to do something different is looking at the fragileness of a landscape or the uniqueness of a resource, at least to the density. And I think that's why we went at least from 15 to 10. And the 20% is, again, if something, even if they leave them there all the time, the person who's bringing that still owns the trailer and can remove the trailer upon request or need or desire, which is different in my mind than a permanent structure that's owned by the owner of the land.
yeah, the state actually allows 20 sites per acre.
So, yeah, so that, I mean, at least the density question, I think, is worthwhile looking at uniquely in our county based on resources and.
I'm referring to if they present a project that meets the state's definition of a campground, how do we go around that?
I think adding some of these, qualifiers about density is one way. We don't go around it, but personalize it to our situation.
But the county can be more restrictive on state things, right? And that's just a commonality.
On this, yes. On lots of things in recent years, no.
My concern is not that people are gonna build something with a bunch of tiny houses on it. I personally have no problem with that. My problem is that, to me, that's no longer a campgrounds. You're now developing something, and that's where I think we have the ability, or should have the ability, to differentiate between a campground versus seasonal workers, people camping every weekend or for a week or 6 months out of the year versus some of that could stay there 12 months out of the year. There are places in the county that have park models on them that people can live in year-round. Totally fine, they're able to do that, and I have no problem with that. But then we need to make sure that we're, as John was saying before, Mr. Cook, that we are now classifying that and getting our fair share out of that as a house, whether it's summertime cabin or 12 months because somebody's working somewhere, or there for the weekends, getting the fair share on the tax siding out of it. Not that we can tax everybody to death, but what's fair is fair. And it meets the requirements of the sanitary and everything else. I mean, I've stayed in these little things. They're with just electricity, no power. I'm sure we did because it rained all weekend versus a tent, So I see every side of every equation, but we need to call a spade in what's being developed here.
How do we do that?
That's the
Well,
question.
I mean, if somebody is going to be proposing something that's going to be lived in year-round with a small cluster of housing, whether it's for rent to own, what people typically call condominium or any kind of multifamily or apartment, then that's regulated under separate rules. And those are, for the most part, separate zoning districts from where campgrounds are allowed as well.
And after May, one of the differences, the state regulates and permits campgrounds, correct? They issue
Right.
permits for them. So if the permit is issued for a campground,
Then it's not going to be converted
the state has
to.
recognized it as a campground, and then we must treat it as a campground, correct?
I don't know about the must part, but if it's being authorized as a campground by the state, it's probably something that we're regulating as a campground, and then that's how it would be regulated, and it wouldn't be able to turn into
But by definition,
multiple
even by
occupancy
state,
development.
even by state, they can't be living year-round. There's a time frame. 8 months, even by state
From 30.
definition. So the mechanism's in place, whether or not it's being followed or not is the question.
Susan?
I think we should pass this. Our staff deals with the reality of this,
Yep,
and
yep.
I promise you, I'm not on RPC right now, but I promise you, they chewed on this a long time. And they tried to come up with something that was realistic. Doesn't mean it can't be modified in the future, it can, but this will make it better than what we have right now.
Yeah. So,
Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have one more question, well, I guess to either RPC or the planning department. Is any of this percolating up from the campgrounds themselves? Do we get any input from the campground operators on this topic?
We didn't directly reach out to them, but I haven't heard from any of the current campground owners.
Okay.
The one thing that we did do that Dave alluded to was we did have an inventory that had been done at some point in the last year or so of the density of the existing campgrounds. And it's true that none of them are denser than 10 units per acre, so it's kind of just a gesture to change from 15 to 10, but I think it's fine, obviously, to make that gesture for the density.
Thank you.
Because one of the things we talked about at the Resource Planning Committee is that by the time you put in your septic system, your stormwater runoff control, all campgrounds, to my knowledge, that I can think of, have common buildings for, bathrooms and showers and laundry and kind of hangout areas and that kind of thing, maybe a camp store. Your driveways, your required parking, your required green space. There's almost no possible way to achieve even probably 10 units per acre for a new campground. The one that we have that's close to that is a very old campground.
Laura?
Yeah, can we call for question?
Yeah. This is a report, an ordinance report, so. Okay. On a voice vote to accept, per the motion, the report. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay. Moving to the ordinance, 2019-08, comprehensive zoning text amendment. Mr. Fisher?
I'll make a motion, Mr. Chairman, to adopt the mandatory zoning ordinance 2019-08, amendment to the text of the Door County Comprehensive Zoning Ordinance.
Second.
Discussion?
I think we should have some discussion on it.
Yeah.
You just talked to yourself over there.
Somebody jinxed the idea of this being a short meeting.
We will go to the voter board since it's an ordinance.
We're not circling the wagons, we're circling the RVs.
That's passed with a vote of 17 yes, 3 no, and 1 vacant. Special reports, none. New business. Anybody want to make a oral committee report? Laura?
Hi. As a revolving loan representative, I just wanted to give a heads up that on a finance committee, we received information on updating that the state is dissolving that program, and that it'll be, our county administrator will be giving us a report, I do believe next month, on how that's going to be moving forward.
Okay. Review committee minutes.
Yep, I don't.
Vouchers, claims, or bills.
Never had.
Announcements, the next regular county board meeting will be September 26th at 9 a.m. It is after WCA Fall Conference, or annual conference.
Can I make some announcements or quick one?
Hold on. The WCA is scheduled 22nd, 23rd, and 24th at the Dells.
Okay, and follow up for that. So yes, the WCA conference, if you're booked, you have the information on your desk. If you are going to cancel, we can still do that if you're not interested in attending. So please let Jill know this week if that's going to change. Also, just some other quick announcements for administrative. We did add administrative committee. We do have a quorum, so we are going to do administrative committee meeting on the 3rd at 1 o'clock. We'll do it as a joint meeting with finance. Likewise, for finance committee members, we have your budget books ready upstairs. If you could run upstairs and pick those up, we'd appreciate it. And this reminder, just for the public, we do have an open supervisory district that we are accepting letters of interest up through through Thursday.
We also normally get our shirts for the conference. We're working on the shirts. A memo will be going out to you shortly. So we'll know what that's going to be, charges, et cetera, so we can get back to Jill and explain what we need as far as ordering them and getting them in place and getting them paid for. Bob?
I was wondering, is it possible to ask if you've received inquiries to the open seat? Can you share, like, have you gotten people
We have
applying?
received one that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you. And I guess, since we're on the topic of expenses, I don't see that we need to buy shirts every time we do something. I mean,
You don't need to buy it, just make it available.
Right on, thank you.
Individual purchase anyways.
Okay, well, as long as it's not a county expense.
No.
What time is that meeting on the 3rd, Ken?
1 p.m.
1?
1 p.m.
The meeting code today is 827. Mr. Fisher?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. If there's no further business to be transacted, I'd like to make a motion, we adjourn.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.